With Donald Trump being elected for a second presidential term, many are looking to a comprehensive list of changes that could be coming from tariffs to economy to markets. But we're going to take a different lens in this conversation. If you are considered a U.S. person, or if you are a Canada-U.S. dual citizen, or have U.S. assets or even beneficiaries in the United States, there may be some things you want to keep your eye on under a second Trump presidency. Nicole Ewing is Director of Tax and Estate Planning, and she joins me now to go through a few of them and what she has her eye on. Thanks for doing this, Nicole. Let's just start with, you've got a list of things like estate tax and assets that are in the States. Let's start with estate tax. What do people need to keep in mind? And I think if you're a high net worth individual, this could be deemed as a positive.
So U.S. estate tax is applicable to U.S. citizens, U.S. residents, and Canadians who hold U.S. situs assets. And so what it means is if you reach a certain threshold, any assets over that amount would be subject to estate tax on your death. And that current threshold amount is $13.61 million. There is a law that will be essentially sunsetting back to the rules that were applicable in 2017, which would reduce that almost $14 million threshold more to about $7 million. And so with nothing changing, that rule would be kicking in 2026. We know from Trump that he is intending to make the current exemption amount permanent, so keeping that at $13.61 million indexed into the future. And so where there may have been some concern that that amount would have been decreased and applicable to people at much lower income and asset levels, we know that that's going to be staying the same into the future. Now, we would want to be thinking about that from a perspective of Canadians who have U.S. assets, or if you have U.S. beneficiaries and you have done your planning to ensure that the estate tax isn't implicating them into a higher tax threshold, then your planning that you currently have in place is likely not going to require changing. We also want to think about this just from a gift tax perspective. For those who have assets in the U.S., gift tax rules also apply in the U.S., and they apply to Canadians who are dealing with U.S. assets. So making sure that you're staying up to date with those rules, but we're not expecting there to be any big changes, rather keeping what is currently in place permanent.
You mentioned in part of this U.S. situs assets. My Latin is a little rusty, Nicole. So what does that mean, first off? Because I mean, that's part of the next thing we're going to talk about as well.
Think about assets that are situated in the U.S. and that it's U.S. situs assets is the term that's used. And there's actually a different definition for estate tax than there is for gift tax. But generally, we're thinking here about real property, other tangible personal property that's located in the U.S., including a business interest or U.S. stocks, securities, perhaps other types of property that are held in the U.S.
Okay, so what about those U.S. situs assets? If you do have real estate, business interests and such in the States, what should you be thinking about as this new presidency unfolds?
Well, if you think that this presidency will result in the value of those assets increasing, then you would want to think about how you would be covering any tax that would be coming as a result of gains on those assets. So either on a current basis or within your estate, ensuring you have liquidity in order to pay for that. We know that there's an indication that the corporate tax rate will either stay the same or go lower. We don't expect that to increase under a Trump presidency. So what does that mean for business owners who have interests in the U.S. Or those who are in Canada in terms of the tariffs or the corporate tax rate? How would that be impacting you from an importing and exporting basis? And making sure that you're thinking about that with respect to your business interests. Also thinking about owners of U.S. real estate. You know, it's important. We've had a lot of talk about immigration, making sure that you as a foreign owner are complying with all of the rules in the U.S., that you know what those are, that you're up to date with your tax filings, and that you're complying with all those local rules that are relevant. And we know that there's different ways of dealing with assets as well within different states. And so if you own real property, for example, in certain states, there may be ways of transferring that property to the next generation in a way that is better than simply gifting it outright or leaving it through your estate. So looking into some of those. And then for Canadians who have U.S. Social Security entitlements, and there's many of them, we have also heard from Trump the wanting to eliminate taxes on Social Security. And so thinking about that from a perspective of your own retirement income and factoring that into the cash flow and retirement income that you expect to have.
I guess another one to think about too, and I guess we don't know what we don't know yet, to be clear, but should tariffs come into play, there could be implications on that front too, but I feel like that's an entirely different show, Nicole.
Well, I think that it really depends on what that means for you, both as a consumer, but also as a business owner. So depending what assets you have, whether or not you are in the market, for example, for an EV electric vehicle, what does that mean for your future planning? So I think we'll have to wait and see a little bit on what that means for the individual and if there's changes to that.
Yeah, good point. Okay, another one, of course, is when there's changes. Some people might decide they want to move one way or the other. Some people might be like excited about opportunity moving to the States. Others might be saying no, thank you, moving to Canada. Either way, though, if someone is thinking about leaving the U.S. and coming here, just they need to think about what that actually looks like financially.
Absolutely. And there are significant financial considerations to be looking at here. And so not just whether you're planning to go to the US or perhaps give up your US citizenship, which of course you're taxed based on citizenship in the US. And so even if you're a Canadian person, you may have responsibilities. Well, you would have responsibilities for US taxes if you are a citizen. And so when people think about, and they say sort of casually that they might want to get rid of their US citizenship or they're planning to move to the US, think about the departure tax rules that apply to that. And so you're essentially deemed to have disposed or sold all of your assets when you are moving, when you're changing your residency. And so that tax bill is going to be applicable on a current rather than future basis. And there's planning that can be done to minimize that, to ensure that you're not double taxed on certain assets, that you understand the timelines involved here. It's not just something that you would do within 2 months, for example. You would want to be thinking about what should you be doing over the next couple of years to be preparing for an effective residency change that is mindful of all of your financial assets, your future income, the way that you're leaving assets to beneficiary. Even the gifts that you're making currently could be treated differently depending on what your residency is even a year or two later.
Yeah, and as we always say, last point, I mean, none of these changes should be spontaneous, of course. You want to take some time and think about all this, think about the things you're talking about, but also thinking to work with your advisor who can help, give you the big picture and incorporate a lot of what you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. They'll be thinking about this, yes, from the larger economic perspective, what it means to the markets and the individual investments that you hold, but they can also take into consideration your unique circumstances, whether that is having a US spouse, having US beneficiaries, being a US person yourself, or even what types of US assets you hold, including US securities and the way that you hold that. And they can help you navigate some of these more challenging planning considerations.
Nicole, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for bringing this up.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Kim.